Thank you for joining this Guardian Live online event. I'm Joseph Harker, the Guardian's Deputy Opinion Editor, and I'll be chairing tonight's event. It's entitled The Brixton Riots, 40 Years On, What Has Changed for Black Britons? I'll introduce you to our panellists shortly, but first a few words about how this platform works and how tonight's discussion will go. We'll be live online for about 1 hour 15 minutes from 7 o'clock to 8:15 p.m. UK time, British Summer Time. For the first 45 minutes, my expert panel and I will be discussing the politics of 40 years ago, setting the scene of what it was like in 1981 around the time of the New Cross fire and the Brixton riots, but then bringing us right up to date to the Black Lives Matter protests of last year and asking what's changed for Black Britons. When we arranged this event, we could never imagine that there'd been such a controversial report out on the same day as this event took place, but after the Tony Sewell report today, and the government's views about racism and whether it even exists or not, it just feels that we should spend a lot of tonight's discussion talking about that. So we'll have plenty of time for that later. We'll have, after the 45 minutes of Q&A with the panel, we'll then have 30 minutes of questions from you, the audience, and there'll be a few ways in which we'll be doing this. Some of you will have sent your questions in advance, and thank you very much for that. We'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can. And during the event, you can send us written questions via the Q&A function on your screen on the side panel, and we'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can. You can choose to be anonymous or to use your own name. If your question is for a particular panelist, please write their name at the beginning of your question. But now to meet our brilliant panel. First, we've got Linda Bellos, who is legendary as a Lambeth Council leader in the 1980s and introduced Black History Month to Britain for the very first time in 1987. In fact, I remember probably my second week as a news reporter ever. I remember going to the launch of that event back in 1987 for the Voice newspaper. Our second panellist is Alex Wheatle, who was there a witness to the events in Brixton 40 years ago. He was also on the demonstration and protest against the New Cross fire and the lack of a proper police investigation into it. And Alex will be talking about specifically those events of 1981. And then I'm also joined by Natasha Johnson, who was a co-founder last year of All Black Lives UK, who was so fired up by the events after the awful killing of George Floyd that she set up this movement, which has been obviously fantastically successful and in energizing and organizing young people. So first, if I can talk to Linda Bellos, if you could, you used to live in Brixton before 1981. If you can just tell us a little bit about that and about your life in politics and what led you to begin Black History Month. Over to you,
Goodness
Linda.
Me, there's quite a lot there. Well, my parents bought a house. They have worked for the early 1950s and bought a house in Brixton in 1956. They might have done so earlier, but I was a small child. I remember going to that new home, and we were the first black family in the street. And some of our neighbours didn't speak to us for, let me see, 15, 16 years, because we were, unmentionable because we were black. And it wasn't just in the street, this was happening in our schools, this was happening with the police, this is happening all throughout society. And we were very clear, we were seen as second-class citizens. And I was pretty bolshy then. I knew I was born in Britain, and I had as much right to be an active citizen, to be engaged in society, and I grew up with a sense of pride. There were wonderful things happening in America, in happening, to people we revere today. I had knowledge of goodness me, how can I forget his name? The man who was in prison for a long time in South Africa, Nelson Mandela. I was aware of Martin Luther King and watching, what was I think of Sunday evening program. These are in my teens, and it was really important to me to have a sense of a pride, actually. And both my parents, instilled in me a sense of pride, because what they knew was happening to them directly was happening to me and my brother. And so we're talking about the 1950s and 1960s. And I guess I was, when I used to be told to go home, and I would say, give me the money, man, and I'll get on the bus, because home was Brixton. They thought they were going to send me some other place. And the fact that I'm light skinned did not allow me to think that in some way I was superior. On the contrary, we are all, if you are of African heritage, my parents and my politics, the politics they both ensured that we were inculcated with, was to be proud to be African. My mother was a white Jewish woman who was proud to be Jewish. She wanted me and my brother, to be proud African Jewish people, children in the first instance. And so I saw huge amounts of direct discrimination. One time in the street, I can't remember exactly how old I was, I saw two police officers beating up a black man. The man is on his knees. He is being beaten, and I've been like most children. We're supposed to be respectful to the police. That's how my parents. But how could I'm standing on the street watching these men who I'm supposed to honour beating a black man? I think I would have been equally disgusted if they'd been beating a white man, but you never saw them beating a white man. What the Black Mariahs, they were called, they would be picking up young men, and beating them up, and you could hear what was going on inside the vans. This is where I lived, just down from Brixton Road, where oh goodness me, Five Ways it was called. It's where tower blocks are now, and those tower blocks weren't built when we were first there. So there was such overt racism on television, racism on the streets, racism in school. I don't know how we survived, but we did. We did.
How did you get into politics, Linda?
Oh, how did I get into politics? Well, I wanted to change the world, and I wasn't prepared to use a gun, and I'm not prepared to ask somebody else to do something I'm not prepared to do myself. So politics had to be the answer. I wanted the world to change. I still want the world to change. And I think politics is a good way of getting you and other people, because it's not just about what I thought. Otherwise you have dictatorships. This is not about me. It was a we. What do we need? What do we want? How are we going to change the world? So that's what I was engaged in at a pretty early age. And then I got married and I had children and lots of things, you do I suppose you could say it was a phase of my life. But I'm glad I had my children, and I now got grandchildren.
And what were your thoughts when the events in Brixton happened in 1981? What was your thinking then?
Oh, I mean, I was at university at that point, and my reaction was any time I heard the word riot, I would say, not riot. This is an uprising. I knew Brixton. I'd grown up in Brixton, and what I saw, what I had seen, what had happened to my own brother being picked up under sus, and every black boy in his class picked up under sus. So I was angry, but I also had had just got my degree in politics. So my reaction was, I guess it was a political one, and I saw brothers being beaten, like my own brother had. But the answer was not violence, not for me. The answer is to change the world by democratic means. We have to be engaged. We have to be involved. There's no point me criticizing somebody else if I'm not myself prepared to make the changes, to contribute to the changes. So that's what I later did.
Linda, maybe I'll come back to that later in the discussion. If we move to Alex now to talk about, April 1981. If you can just talk, as someone who was living in Brixton at the time, what was the vibe like? What was the atmosphere like? And in the build up to the events of April 1981, and especially in terms of the Deptford fire, which had happened in January that year.
It was very tense, Joseph, but you even have to go beyond the Deptford fire, way back to, for example, 1969, Olive Morris, when she was only 17 years of age, and she intervened when a Nigerian man was being beaten up by the police. And she was beaten up herself. And when they found her at the police station, she was almost unrecognizable because of that intervention. So this had been going on for decades. And so it's very important that we tell these histories and these narratives. The Brixton uprising didn't start over 2 days in April 1981. It started a long time before that. I was on the march on the day of action after those poor 13 black children passed away in the Deptford fire. And it was my first political action of my life. And I remember as we marched across Blackfriars Bridge, the police got more nervous and they started to hurl insulting racist terms at us. And they were the intimidators. They were the ones who were, started the trouble at that particular march. And I was dismayed when I woke up the next morning and I saw the right-wing newspapers because they fanned this hatred, saying that young black men or whatever ran amok up in the city of London, which was a crude damn lie. And they've been lying ever since, fanning this hatred of black people in this country. And so come April 1981, the tension was already there because those, again, the Deptford fire, those young people never got acknowledgement or any sympathy or any empathy from the establishment, none at all. I cannot even remember the local MP showing any kind of support, none at all. There was no letter from the Queen, there was nothing. And so we felt very isolated. We felt that it was them against us with this racist police force who had declared war on us. So that was the atmosphere leading up to April the 10th. And I remember it was a very warm Friday night, Saturday and Sunday. And on a Friday, I was shooting pool in a pub just off Brixton Hill near the prison. And then a young boy came running in and he said there was some kind of incident or disturbance going on in Brixton where everyone believed that a police officer had stabbed a young black man. And I remember everyone was saying, enough, this cannot go on. And I remember that night, the Friday night, we went from house to house, estate to estate, and everyone was talking about, we have to make a stand. This cannot continue anymore. And so on a Saturday morning, usually Saturday morning, I was sleeping, but on this particular Saturday morning, I was in the middle of Brixton from around about 9 o'clock because I wanted to see what would occur. And so I took up my usual position in Safana B's record shack in the junction of Colaba Lane and Atlantic Road, bopping away to the music and whatever. And it was absolutely packed. Everywhere was packed. People were just wondering what is going to kick off. And of course, the police obliged. They arrested a minicab driver. I think his name was Wadada. That could have been his nickname. And the police started to manhandle him, rough him up, bang his forehead onto the bonnet of the police car. And one man intervened. His name was Johnny Brixton. I don't know if Linda remembers him, but a guy called Johnny Brixton. And he was the first one to actually confront police and say, this cannot go on. And then after that, people tried to free Wadada from being arrested. And then all hell broke loose when the police van came into came into the street. And that was at that point, I ran out from the record shop because I just saw a crowd of people running, and I just followed this adrenaline rush. It was exhilarating. It was empowering because for the first time in my experience of living in Brixton, the police were actually running away from us, where beforehand it was us kind of running away because we knew what would happen to us if they had us in a police cell. Everyone, all my friends had stories of woe, what happened to you inside a police cell. And so at that point, we actively resisted arrest. We didn't want to get arrested. And that's why we attacked them in numbers, because we didn't want to end up in a police cell in Brixton or Kennington. And so the battle raged for the rest of that Saturday. And we wanted to hold the top end of Railton Road, what we called the front line. And for 2 or 3 hours, I wasn't even aware that looting of the shops was taking place because me and many people were, fighting with the police. And they were cowering behind dustbin lids and what have you. They were not prepared whatsoever. And the shock on their face was so empowering for us. It really was because, as I mentioned before, we've never seen anything like that. And I only really retained control just after midnight when they must have come in from all over London because there were police blockages at the top of the South Circular, all the way down to Kennington. I remember the front line. I had coach after coach after coach of police officers in green vans, sipping their coffees in polystyrene cups. I'll never forget that day. And there was a guy on the front line called Tumpo who sold dumplings and fish fritters and so on. And he made a roaring trade that night. His shop was one of the ones that were untouched. I didn't even remember him, Linda. Tumpo, he's a very short guy. And he made a killing that night, an absolute killing. And the police, they were traumatized. They were absolutely traumatized. On the Sunday, it was, in a way, it was hilarious. Because some friends of mine, a few friends of mine, they kind of danced and strolled down to Brixton in their new clothes. And they were teasing the police with their nice silk shirts and their Farah trousers and their crocodile skin shoes and what have you. That was quite a hilarious sight, but there was still tension on the fringes. There was still bits of violence going on. And I guess at the end of it, me and many others felt that a stand had to be taken, because the police had declared war on us. And we were kind of proud of taking up that stand or taking them on because they had this meted out violence on us on a daily basis.
Alex, was there any sense of, you talk about the exhilaration and the exuberance, was there any sense of regret after that so much damage had been caused to what was the heart of your local community and the kind of rebuilding job that was necessary and, the lack of, the impacts on the facilities that you would have probably taken for granted at that time?
Yeah.
The shops and the markets and everything else.
Yes, there was. There were a few shops that we cared for, but there were other shops. Like, I remember the Windsor pub on Railton Road. I mean, that was firebombed because for example, post offices. I had friends of mine who could not cash their gyros because the post offices were closed. So you had little incidents like that where there was a sense of regret that perhaps we burned down our own neighborhood, and many others were saying, let's take it uptown. There was real talk of that. I remember on the early hours of the Saturday morning, the Sunday, and so on, people were advocating, let's take this up to Whitehall. But then there was talk that, oh no, the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, should probably bring the army out and so on. There's no way they'd let us get close to the seat of government in the country. But yes, there was regret at some shops that were touched and looted and so on.
Well, okay, thanks very much, Alex, for that eyewitness account. Natasha, exuberance, exhilaration, you probably had those same emotions last year when you were organising massive crowd events for Black Lives Matter. Can you just tell us a little bit about what got you fired up about all that?
So I think, obviously, being a student, so I was in third year last year, I think a lot of different things kind of built up to what happened with George Floyd. I definitely think, because I grew up in Buckinghamshire, which is quite a white, obviously, county just outside London. So personally, I had a lot of, not so much like disdain, but I was angry nobody really seemed to understand where I was coming from in terms of seeing things as racist. Obviously, trying to explain to like a population of 99% of white people what racism is, obviously, is just going to make you tired and it's going to make you annoyed, and you can't keep doing that forever. So I think the Brexit vote was something that really affected me, and that was just before I went to university. And then I was at university in Bath, and I think the way that I was treated, like people would come up to me and like randomly touch my hair, or like there was a lot of things that was just like really kind of like, it makes you feel othered. So obviously when the lockdown happened and I woke up the day that George Floyd died at like 4 a.m, and I feel like I'm a very intuitive person, so I woke up for a reason, and I watched in real time what was happening. And I think for me, it's like watching someone you're related to, you know, get attacked. That's how it feels. As Black people, we all feel like if something's happening to one of us, it's happening to all of us. So I was kind of like, we can't sit here in England and think that, you know, we're absolved of all of the problems, because America and England are so closely linked. And I don't think people understand that. That's where it's kind of had the disconnect, that America and England are such completely different entities when they basically work off the same script, just because, you know, stuff isn't happening as often or as much or as in much, you know, velocity as it is being portrayed in America doesn't mean that it's not happening here. So obviously me and Ima and the other co-founders, we kind of just decided that we have to do something. Like, I wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone else to do something. If I had the means to do it, even though I was studying, this was something that was really important to me. And I was like, I have to get out there. I have to use my voice, whatever voice that I do have, to not prove, but to show that, you know, obviously solidarity with America, but also that we have our own problems to face here. People have died in police custody here, and there's been no justice for these people. So obviously people like Linda and Alex before me have paved the way for me to do what I've been allowed to do. And it's such an honor to be kind of in the same space of people that have been fighting, you know, for my rights. Like, even when my parents were young, my mum was 13 when the Brixton riots happened. So all of these kind of things happening, like it affects you. And I think people kind of just don't take racism seriously enough. They don't understand how detrimental it is, how much it affects you. I'm probably going to remember summer 2020 for the rest of my life, not just because I was so deeply involved in it, but because I was at the age of 21 seeing Black people that looked like me get killed. Breonna Taylor got shot when she was asleep. Like, George Floyd got publicly executed on the street. So it's things like that have definitely, you know, made it easier to kind of get into this transition of being an on the ground activist.
Natasha, when you started, like you say, you started this with a friend or a couple of friends. And how did it feel for you, the way that it sort of, this momentum that just suddenly took off, and, you know, suddenly from what was a kind of just a hashtag became these kind of public protests, public demonstrations on a scale I don't think any of us have seen before. How did it feel to be sort of at the start of all of that?
I mean, it was really like overwhelming, and I probably haven't gotten over it like as much as I probably should have. Like, you know, leading a march of 20,000 people through London is like, it's not an easy task. And then all the kind of stuff that came after that wasn't easy, like having Daily Mail articles written, death threats, and being called Antifa, all these kind of things, you know, as a young person. But it's also kind of like, we saw so many other young people and so many people when we were having demonstrations. I remember there was like 11-year-olds speaking, there was people younger than me speaking, and I'm just thinking, like, how can you not feel emotional? You're watching a child explain to you what racism is like in this country, and you still continue to gaslight us and say that it's not real. So you're going to tell an 11-year-old, a child who has just come up in the world, that what they're experiencing is fake, and you're expecting us not to have a reaction about that kind of stuff. It's really hard not to be passionate, and it's really hard not to like get everybody wound up about it, because I think, especially with my generation, they're starting to really see the effects of what, you know, the government is doing, not just racism, but oppressing all minority groups, Black people, Romani, Gypsies, Irish people. There's so many different people that are obviously being affected, but 100%.
I was just going to say, it must have surprised you, the amount of interest. And why do you think it took off so rapidly?
I think because, especially in this country, they're very good at sweeping things under the carpet. So if something happens and people don't really want to talk about it, they're very, very good at getting it out next news cycle. But I think because so many people, especially in America, and this country loves copying America, so because so many people were outraged in America and, standing up and saying, okay, black people aren't being treated properly. What are you actually doing about it? There was a lot of guilt that came up because people knew that they had kind of just been sitting idly and quietly watching racism happen and not, doing anything about it. And I also think a lot of people were just fed up of seeing, their friends, their family members, be affected by such a massive issue that has clearly been in this country for, longer than probably my family's even been here. There's such a long history of racism in the country that I think you can't ignore it. So if you are ignoring it, then what is missing from you? Because there's so much glaring in the face of us at the moment that is saying that this country is racist, whether it's you believe that is institutional or not. There is an overwhelming sense of racism in this country, and you would have to be absolutely deluded to try and even argue against that. So I think young people are kind of trying to glare it in the face and hold the mirror up and be like, this is what you look like. This is what it's like. You can't say that you tolerate people when we're still 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched. How is that tolerating? And then the word tolerant, it's not even positive. It's literally a pejorative term. So if you want to say that you accept people, where's the acceptance? If you can tolerate us living here, we wouldn't be having to have discussions of what happened 40 years ago if it had changed. So I definitely think people are just fed up, and I spoke for a really long time. Sorry about that.
No, it's great to hear you.
Well done.
What I realised is great about this panel is that we've got 3 people who've all sort of decided to do something about racism and to resist and to fight back, but choosing 3 different ways. You've got Natasha, you've gone for sort of public protest. Alex, you became an author, and your seminal work, East of Acre Lane, was about the Brixton uprising itself. And Linda, as you said earlier, you chose politics and to go through that route to try and effect change. And maybe if I could come back to you, Linda, then to talk a little bit about, what happened after 1981 and, in terms of running Lambeth Council and having to deal with the aftermath of the riots.
Well, what did happen was, I think, a number of black men and women decided to be engaged. Whatever the man was saying, we were going to be engaged. We weren't going home, because that was, in the 1950s and 60s, many people came here assuming that they get, earn some money and go home, maybe set up business home, whether home was a Caribbean island, whether it was an African country, that we would be going, we wouldn't be staying. Instead of our children stayed, as it were. Alex, we were here to stay, and we needed to do something. And rather than just complain, for me, the answer was engage. And so I joined black sections in the Labour Party. I went, I got invited to go. It was in Birmingham. I went being a little, critical. I wasn't necessarily going to join, but I ended up, I went home. I was thinking, how did this happen? I was vice chair of black sections of the Labour Party, but I got only to kind of find out, what was happening. And then from that, I was living in Brixton. I'd grown up in Brixton, gone away, come back, and the council made a huge difference in people's lives. Whether building homes, doing a whole host of things. And I did feel that it was worthwhile, me, as it were, getting my hands dirty and getting involved in council. And I did. Separate from that, Margaret Thatcher chose to deny councillors the right. I'm talking about the 31 who were discharged and disqualified. They were arguing against Tory policies. That's right. It was rate capping. That was the answer. The issue was rate capping. So I had become a councillor when somebody else had stood down. So I myself hadn't been in a position where I had to make a choice about rate capping.
So rate capping was declared illegal, or was it that the council was rate capped?
That's right. So all of the Labour Party locally supported our councillors. Anyway, the Tories got rid of all of those councillors, and I and 2 other councillors were left. There was a bit of a strange but legal things in which we had all the power until, I think, about 5 weeks later, when there was elections, and Margaret Thatcher actually went on. She did a party political broadcast saying that the Tories were going to win Lambeth. Well, guess what happened? Not only did we win as many seats as Ted Knight's administration, we won more. And in this situation where very few people had been councillors, I put myself forward. I must say that I didn't particularly want to be a council leader, but because none of us were paid in those days. I don't know if you know. So I had a decent salary, and I stopped having that salary, and I got something. It was like £12.68 per day attendance allowance. That was it. Not for Sundays either. So I got this money. So people were assuming that I put myself forward as a councillor to earn money. But in fact, what I was doing was I was working something on average 13 hours a day for £12 and no money. And
were you able to help rebuild Brixton at that time? Were you able to, bring communities together,
I think so. I mean,
deal relations with the police, or
I did. I had meetings with the police as a councillor. I insisted that I meet with the police regularly, and they were respectful meetings. The Tories were in government, so things like housing for people, black or white, Tories didn't want that. They would happily sell homes to white people who would choose to buy, and the right to buy, but the accommodation for ordinary people was reduced, and it still is, which is why so many people today are in appalling living circumstances. But in those days, we had Thatcher and others, and all of the media really targeting. I mean, the idea of a black woman, and at the same time, I was out as a lesbian. Imagine, there was like, and there was a huge amount of hostility, but it didn't, frankly, trouble me in the sense of, growing up in the 1950s. It was nothing compared. It was what they did, and the power. I had relative amount of power and access to the media, so I could speak out, and I did, and I hope that I did in a way that was helpful to the wider community of which I was a part. Because I had, being a leader of council did mean I had some, media. I'm not savvy, but I had attention, and I hope that what I did was not about me. It was about us, and about freedom and justice and liberation. That's what some of the things we sought to do.
Alex, if I can come to you, and maybe now's the time to sort of bring it forward, and you've seen sort of the aftermath of Brixton 1981 and the impact it had on your local community, and I'd be interested to know how that worked with the police as well, and relations with the police, and whether things improved or not afterwards, or whether it just descended into a sort of draconian crackdown or whatever, and maybe now bring it to the modern day and thinking how you look back and think on that era compared to today.
Well, at the time, it felt like a draconian kind of a bounce from them, a counteractive kind of attack, really, because they just made sure that they were better armed, they could defend themselves in a better way and so forth. They had all this kind of armor on. So they didn't really look at the Scarman report, which stated that the police were institutionally racist. He actually said that. I mean, I was shocked on hearing that report or reading it. And so we didn't really enact on any of those recommendations as far as I saw. And during the following years, black people were still being killed in police custody. And I really don't know. Maybe you can count on one hand the amount of times that a police officer has been convicted of a death of a black person in custody. And so that is still a major sore in our community.
You don't even need one finger to count the number of times police have been.
Well, I haven't got the records with me, but I very much doubt if you could use two fingers.
Yeah.
So that is still a major sore. It's something that institutions in this country are in denial of. I mean, there's been obviously murders of black people in custody, and yet they still walk free all the time. And this is why the George Floyd thing was so triggering for us. And so, yes, in terms of recorded interviews in police cells. I mean, I've been in police cells. I've been beaten up. I've been beaten up in a police van, chucked out of a moving police van. Nothing done. Nothing. Nowhere where you can go to report this, or if you was believed, no one would believe it. And so this happened for years and years. And then the Stephen Lawrence thing happened.
I mean, that's quite. You're talking about being regularly beaten up. It's shocking to say being thrown out of a moving van. I mean, that's.
Yeah,
and
that was standard, Joseph. That was standard.
For our younger members of the audience, what would happen when those kind of incidents? How would
sometimes you were picked up and they wouldn't even bother take you to the charging officer in Brixton Police Station or Kennington. That was notorious, Kennington. No one wanted to go to Kennington Police Station because they were just, 6, 7, 8 policemen would just beat you up in the cell. And sometimes they would pick you up in the police van. We used to call them beast wagons. So you put you inside, drive you somewhere quiet, and kick the living SHIT out of you. And that was it. And they kick you out because, that was their exacting revenge, if you like. That was standard. We respected that. So this is why we put up so much resistance. You had to, because it could be a life and death situation. We knew that. As a young black man, we knew that if you were arrested by the police, you could be dead the next day. That was our reality. That was our existence. And we had to figure that in.
To our daily lives.
So obviously there was 1985, what happened with Cherry Gross. So Brixton erupted again, and I think there was a following riot. I think it was 87. So the police took a very long time to actually address their naked racism in the Metropolitan Police. And I think we have that problem today. Just last year, I think it was Bianca Williams, the young athlete, who was stopped with a partner in a car. She was manhandled out of that car, assaulted. And yet, when I saw the press the next day, I didn't see the Home Secretary say this is unacceptable. I didn't see the Mayor of London say it was unacceptable. I didn't see any major politicians say this is unacceptable. But this is what black people have to deal with on a daily basis. And yet when you have this vigil in Clapham Common, and I studied it, I watched the film many, many times, and I'm thinking, okay, when does this get really bad now? Because in my experience, I remember being dragged, being kicked, arrested with a boot on my head. This is what I term as police violence, but what I saw there was a young woman lying on the ground. She's being handcuffed, and I thought, okay, well, at least they're not assaulting her. And yet, the newspapers, Priti Patel and everybody else, this is unacceptable police behavior. I'm thinking, are we in the same world? Am I watching the same kind of thing going on? Because when it happens to black people, no one cares. Institutions still do not care what happens to black people when they're in police custody, when they're being arrested, when they're being dragged on the floor, when they're being beaten up or whatever. Until society
Can I bring in Natasha?
It's also society. Okay.
If I could just bring in Natasha, just see what your thoughts are hearing those stories from Alex from the 1980s. And do you think that now, and we've had this report out today, are things now a lot better than the 1980s, so we should stop complaining? Or how do you feel hearing those stories?
I mean, it's really hard not to, like, A, get upset, and B, get angry, because I just think that this country is so inherently violent with the language that it uses and the actions that they display. There is very much in this country an us versus them sort of behaviour. That's how it's always felt. It's never gone away. It's always been like that. I think hearing, stories about what has happened to Alex and, kind of living in the, obviously digital world, and you have people saying that, stuff like that didn't happen. How can you, as a person receiving that information, assume that, anybody would lie about that? That's how Black people have been living in this country for such a long time. And I definitely think that the report today that came out was not only gaslighting, was not only lying, it's actually a very good explanation or a very good example of the British patting themselves on the back for doing absolutely nothing and saying that, institutional racism doesn't exist. And there was a section about how African slaves it was not only labour, but how they became African British citizens. Stuff like that is really not only offensive and disgusting. My ancestors did not get brought into slavery to then think about, I wonder how my, descendants will be able to fit into the British society. To drown it down like that is just absolutely, like, I can't believe that was even published. And then you have the audacity to sit there and say that this country is not racist. You're publicising those things. Black people are able to engage with those sorts of materials and still understand that they are not valued in this country. They are not seen as equal in this country. Anything that I'm complaining about is not real. I've made it up. It's in my head. I've got a chip on my shoulder and I don't want to succeed. And all these things are happening that are making me, somehow not achieving in this country. But I think so many things have been swept under the carpet. We've not been told about. My dad, when he came over to this country, he had to get his degree again. A lot of people aren't told that when they come to this country. Even if you have a degree from where you're from, you have to get an English one. All these small, microaggressive bits of colonisation, and then you're going to throw a report out that says that the UK is not institutionally racist. Do you think that we can't read? Do you think that we're not experiencing things? Do you not think that I can see how other Black people are treated? Do you not think that I'm aware of how I'm being treated within a whitely majority city or place? I just think that they're treating us as if, if we keep saying that it's not there, then they'll just give up. But I'm not going to give up, because this is my life. This is how I've lived. This is how Linda has lived. This is how Alex has lived. Jason, it's probably how you've lived as well. To sit here and be gaslit every day by the country that you live in, to say that your struggles are not real, is really something that I don't actually think is very fair. And I don't think that we should just have to sit there and take it just because we're 3% of the population, making a load of noise. If you treated us correctly, then, all these things wouldn't have to happen, and you wouldn't feel like we're anti-British. We're not anti-Britain. We're anti what Britain has done and is continuing to do, continuing to lie about, and continuing to expect people to not be upset about it. You can't disrespect people, their lineage, their culture, their family tree. You can't elect a prime minister that calls Black children pickaninnies and expect us to sit here and be okay with that. I don't think anybody would be okay with that. It doesn't matter what country you're from. If you are being treated differently because of the colour of your skin, you're not going to let anybody tell you about what they think is right or what they think is wrong. I'm living the experience. So I'm the one who should be able to tell you how we should fix it. I'm sick frankly, white people trying to say, oh, you're making it up and it's not true. You don't live as a black person. You're not a minority. 87% of the country looks like you. So when it's only 3%, we can have that conversation. Until then, I don't want to hear anybody thoughts about racism when they've not experienced it, basically.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Linda, can I come back to you and your thoughts on the report today, the Tony Sewell report, from someone with such a long experience, both of challenging racism and of decades of experience in all of this?
Where to start? I mean, Tony Sewell's politics have been this shit. Forgive me for saying, from day one. This is not new, and the fact that this Prime Minister should think it's a good thing, and a Home Secretary think it's a good thing to have somebody like him. No, now I got it in my hand. I bet he wouldn't recognise what this is. It's actually called the Equality Act 2010. It's the law of this land, and I bet you the Home Secretary and all of the civil servants have not read it. We're supposed to, we're all, apparently. This is law. Why don't they understand the law applies to everybody? I think the only exception will be the Queen. She doesn't, she approves this stuff, but she doesn't have to live with it, even though some of them are saying maybe they should. I'm just disgusted that, you know, the term Uncle Tom, I think they designed it for him. And it's a great pity, because I don't normally... As
a moderator here, I'll try and say, let's try and steer clear of personal abuse.
Okay. Well, politically, I have a problem with somebody who doesn't understand a history of which he has been a beneficiary. The black people who went before him. Now, I'm not anti-black middle class people, and you know, and he is, and he's seeking to put himself in the same kind of category as a right-wing white person. I guess you could say that's some degree of equality, but I'm going to be as critical of him as I am with any white man who says the same kind of rubbish that justifies the second-hand treatment that we get. And I'm passionate about the law because I think it should underpin what we do, all of us. And I don't think there are any exceptions. If he had made reference to the Equality Act, which is the nearest legislation we have dealing with racism, if he had understood it, he wouldn't be writing the same kind of rubbish that he's writing. And how could our Prime Minister, well, of course, we know how could we have a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary who thinks it's okay to ignore equality law? That's really strange. So, no, I'm not being rude. I'm just saying it as I see it.
And Alex, your thoughts on today's report?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I just totally reject it. Totally reject it. Utterly. You know, I can't 100% reject it. I just want to talk about how society deals with black pain. You know, I remember last year, and I'm going to say their names out loud. It was Nicole Smallman and Bibba Henry. They were stabbed to death, I think, in northwest London in June last year. A horrific murder. 2 black women. And yet, again, they weren't, you know, there's no campaign for them. Police officers took a selfie. I don't know what has become of those police officers. You know, I didn't hear no Home Secretary say this is unacceptable. They have to do something about violence on women. You know, none of these things. And I didn't see a member of the royal family offer their condolences or lay a wreath where they were slaughtered. So society really...
So the police didn't even search for them. The family ended up finding their bodies in the park, not the police.
That's right. Absolutely, yeah. So I'm really worried about how society still deals with black deaths and black pain. You know, our lives worth it, and this is why what Natasha's doing is so important. Our lives
Hmm.
matter. When there's been a death in our community, their lives are as valuable as anyone else's. And when will be the time when society sees that and understands that and empathizes with that? Because all I'm seeing now is this great outpouring of grief, which should be always be the case. But where's the great outpouring of grief when we're hurt, when members of our community are slaughtered? Where are these great pillars of institution? You know, these so-called great people who are supposed to care so much about us. Where are they? Where's Priti Patel? Where's the rest of them? When we're hurting, and in my view, I don't see them in my sight, none at all.
Hmm.
Can I just remind anyone in the audience to please send in your questions because we can now start to move to audience questions. The first question is from Sue Jones, and she says she was living in Liverpool 8, that's widely known as Toxteth, in 1981, and she witnessed the riots there. How, she asked, were they connected to the Brixton riots, and what has changed for Black Britons in Liverpool? I'm not sure how many people here would know the situation in Liverpool, but Alex, Linda, maybe you can take that question.
Well, where to begin? I mean, I know some of the activists in Toxteth. There was great solidarity amongst black activists throughout the country. Certainly in the 1980s, we had it in part through black sections, but there were lots of other things, nothing to do with the Labour Party. Huge amounts of solidarity amongst black activists. I'm thinking about Bristol as still needing support. Where it's hard to understand how our media can be so. I'm trying to find the right word. It's not just about being biased, so blind, I think I have to say, about things are happening to black people, and I think the media, all of it, I'm talking about the newspapers, I'm talking about our radio, our television, acts as though black lives do not matter. That what happens to us is of no significance. If it's not going to be of interest to a white man of a certain class, then that applies also, by the way, to white women being murdered and not nobody pointing out how vile, how commonplace the murder of black women and white women are. So it's not just, I mean, we've got black men, white women, black women. Wait a minute, we're a majority. How come all the things that decide who's going to be on television, who's going to going to be, in the newspapers, all of the communication doesn't seem to be owned in any significant share, by us, but we're on the receiving end of violence, of discrimination, and then we don't even get talked about. It's not even, there's no reflection that these things are happening. They might even be related to each other. I don't mean by a person, I mean by a culture that sees black lives as being of no significance. And in the main, I must say that the lives of white women and black women are being of no significance. That is something that I have been, working on. I'm a feminist. I'm a lesbian feminist. I'm a black activist. I am proud of all of the things I am, and I see the connections. And it's not a competition about who's the most oppressed. And that's one of the things that has been a problem in the past, where we've been competing with each other about who's the most oppressed. I happen to think that every life is of importance. And I'm sick to death of some lives being it's null and void. Just there's no, as though we were not there. Historically, as though we weren't there.
Can I come to another question now? It's from Srivasha Jele, and she asks, and maybe it's a more positive look on things. She asks, in your opinion, how far have race relations changed for the better over the last 40 years in the UK? And Natasha, I'll ask you first, just because to get that sense of whether you think things are heading in the right direction or not right now.
I think that's a really, difficult question, because some days it feels like, you're kind of arguing with a brick wall and you kind of can't see, what is going to happen beyond the interaction that you're having right now. So sometimes I think, okay, what was this 10 months? What have we changed in this 10 months? I put myself on the line for 10 weeks over the summer, like in front of police, hecklers, all this kind of stuff. And I still am not, maybe seeing the benefits of like how society is getting more equal. And then on the other hand, the way that people reacted to this bill today is something that I don't think, if it would have come out this time last year, there would have been, the same amount of reaction to it. I think definitely within, I would say culturally, there's a lot more conversations happening, whether or not they're the right conversations, like is racism really a thing in the UK? Maybe kind of things like that aren't necessarily going in the right direction, but it's the direction that it's happening to go in. I think it really depends on, kind of my generation, Gen Z, what we're allowed to kind of do, what restrictions we have, because if this bill gets passed, that's setting us back, another 10, 20 years in terms of like all the things that we've been able to achieve. So I definitely think if it has changed, it will show itself within the next couple of weeks when we're protesting the bill. If it's been genuine change and genuinely feel that they are anti-racist and they are against what's happening in this country, then we'll see it unfold. But from my perspective, I think most people don't want to be changed. They don't want to listen to another, opinion. They're very hard-headed. I find that about British people a lot. They don't like hearing, either truths about themselves or how other people perceive them. It doesn't matter. As long as Britain thinks it's great, that's it. So,
Alex, if I can come to you, Alex, as an old timer on this, you've seen a lot of changes over the years, over the decades. We're the same age, I can say this. But do you think we're going in the right direction, or is it a bit like Natasha, that some days it feels up and some days it feels like the glass half empty?
Yeah, some days it feels like that. But Joseph, I'm quite encouraged, especially by what occurred last year with people like Natasha going to marches. And if you could indulge me for a moment, I remember when I had my middle school birthday party, and he invited his friends from school, and his school friends consisted of many kids who had parents from all over the world. And it didn't even occur to him where their parents came from. They just came to our house and everyone had a fantastic day, black, white, brown, whatever. And to see those same kids going on Black Lives Matter marches and supporting each other and shouting out and drowning out racism and so on and trying to fight for something, that heartened this old kind of warrior, if you like. So I'm encouraged for the future, because one day the likes of Natasha and Michael's generation, they went into power, and they won't tolerate this. They've had enough of it already, and they simply will not tolerate this. So that's my belief, that they will ascend to power and things will be different when they do ascend power.
Thanks very much, Alex. Linda, we've got a question here from Emma, and she asks about institutional racism, and she says, what information can we use to explain to our allies the reality of institutional racism at a time like this when the government is denying that it's a problem?
Well, it is the culture of the institution, and that's the systems that are in its place that allows the same white men to carry on running things. They're not doing a very good job generally. I mean, you look at anything, honest, just rationally, there's such. I don't know. Are we going in the right direction? I don't know. The more women, and I put Margaret Thatcher aside, the more women are being involved in running things, and they're doing, generally speaking, a much better job than the men who were running things. And I would like to see every human being encouraged, supported to reach their full potential. And we don't live in a society that allows that. It assumes that if your parents pay for your education, that somehow you are superior to other human beings. And that is just a waste of blasted resources. It's a waste of money, and it's certainly a waste of talent. Every human being should have the opportunity to develop all of the things they are and that they can be. I think that the more women and increasing numbers of men are adopting that sort of approach, and I think this country will be, and I'm agreeing with Alex about, our children and our grandchildren, it will be a better world, a better place, and I continue to hope that we allow every human being to be of their best and find a way of encouraging those who are antisocial, who are racist, who are homophobic, etc., to understand why, if they want to hold their views, they can keep them to themselves. I'm not in favour of putting people in prison because I don't agree with them, but there's a huge amount of potential in this country, and it would be wonderful if it were free to develop with each other to make this country a better country. And it doesn't have to be rule of the world. It would just be good enough to be good enough.
Right. I should maybe just remind people that after the 1981 riots in Brixton, and they were around the whole country that year as well. They spread over that summer. We had this Scarman inquiry, which Alex mentioned earlier, and that talked about the racism, deep-seated racism within the police, although it did use this sort of phrase about rotten apples. But he also actually proposed positive discrimination as a way of redressing the imbalance. And the Scarman inquiry led to a whole raft of, especially in local authorities, adopting, accepted that they need to recruit their local communities, and it heralded the era of equal opportunities, which was a very positive time in Britain. The Macpherson inquiry 20 years ago, looking into the death of Stephen Lawrence, coined this term institutional racism, and made it not just about people being deliberately racist or bigoted, but just about the way that institutions can work without individuals actually being racist, but they can operate in racist ways because that's the way the institution is. And I kind of half think, after the tumultuous events of last summer and the whole Black Lives Matter movement, this was the government's response to that. Today we've heard the government's response to that. And it is just completely the absolute opposite of how the government, even Margaret Thatcher in 1981, responded in a constructive way. And we had Michael Heseltine, touring inner cities across the country and regenerating and putting money aside to regenerate them. This now seems to be, as they would maybe say about you, Natasha, was it innocently deluded or whatever? I can't remember what the exact term was, but, well-meaning well-meaning idealist. How do you respond as a young, well-meaning idealist to the report today?
I mean, I shared a lot of, expletives. I think today that's kind of the only kind of response I have to the report. Again, I think it is very, very violent in its terminology, in its language, in the way that it's written. Obviously I brought up the fact that they said that, African slaves thinking about how they can, integrate into British society. And I just kind of think I'm kind of past the point of wanting to be accepted, because the whole institution will tell me that I'm not English or British, and I will never be able to fully have the experience of a British English person. So it's very difficult, and I think a lot of young people in my position have had an identity crisis, for the last 20 years of what we should feel and what we shouldn't feel. And I can imagine, reading that as another Black person who might not even be involved in activism at all, and having experienced racism in this country, then to read from, the highest part of this country that there is no institutional racism. We have found absolutely none. Even though you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a Black man in London, you are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth if you're a Black woman, you're twice as likely to go to prison if you're a Black woman if you're not a white woman. All of these things that are institutionally racist, you're telling me doesn't exist. I just think from a point of young people, we're sick of being lied to, and we're sick of people acting like we can't see beyond, the thin veil of, tolerance and acceptance that Britain has tried to, push over the last however many years. I think we all have access to information. We all have access to people that have, been directly affected by the British law system and by Britain's institutional regimes and companies. So I think it was a very wrong move by the government to publish that report just on their kind of basis, because nobody is going to be happy with that. I don't think anybody who has read that report today, Black or white, is happy with that, because it's lies, and everybody knows that they're being lied to. So it's about how long do you want to sit there and be lied to? How long are you going to allow the government and, the 1% of this country to continue to feed you lies about what is happening and what is right in front of your face? Priti Patel said something today about the police. Sorry. She said something today about the police and how, they shouldn't believe what they're watching because it hasn't been put through the government. Stuff like that. The propaganda that is being pushed from this government is absolutely crazy. So I think we only have a really short amount of time to fight it and reverse it before it completely goes beyond saving.
Linda, I've got one question for you from Priscilla Ailes, and she asks, what could Labour or the opposition do to support Black Britons more? What would your thoughts be as a sort of, what could Labour do to support Black Britons more?
Well...
And she says it in particular, given what she calls Keir Starmer's disappointing reaction to the Edward Colston and the Black Lives Matter movement last year.
It would be quite nice if Labour leadership understood what equality law says. So I don't want them making it up as they go along, and I think it's very important. I'd actually do this for free. I'll train them. I've spent years training people. I'll train them to understand. They don't have to understand what the law requires them to do, requires all of us to do. It would be a good starting point if Keir Starmer, who is a lawyer, understood and applied the Equality Act 2010. It would be a good thing. That's a start.
Okay. And Alex, a question for you from Mary Kelly, kind of on a different tack, but she asks if you could recommend literature that will help guide the conversation towards race equality and a love of diversity. What kind of book? If people want to read about this issue and, to understand what the issues that we'll be talking about today?
Well, forgive me, but you can make a start with My Cane Warriors, which depicts the slave revolt in Jamaica in 1760. You can start with that, but there's a whole range of that.
I want to give you a proper chance to plug this. How do we spell cane?
Cane, C-A-N-E, Warriors.
Oh, cane, as in sugar cane.
Yeah, Cane Warriors. It's the story of the slave revolt led by Chief Taki in Jamaica in 1760. So that is a start, but there's so much Black literature out there that's really excellent. So I just advise you to go on your online book place wherever you go to buy books and check them out. And we want our stories to be read and shared. And that experience. I mean, Bernardine Evaristo won the Booker last year, so check out her book. What's it called? Girl, Woman, Other.
Yeah.
So there's a whole. There's in fact there's one I'm reading now, Black Teacher by Beryl Gilroy. She has an incredible experience of teaching in the UK from the 1940s, 1950s. That will be published very, very soon. And so we have many, many stories. So find us online, find us in bookshops. We're there, we're present.
And Natasha,
I'm still waiting for a publisher.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for a publisher, for somebody to pick up my memoirs.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They'll definitely be worth reading. And Natasha, what were you showing us?
So Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde. I just think it's a really good place to start if you want to read some, Black lesbian poetry or stories about, how we can all basically work together in dismantling white supremacy. I think it's a really good start. Obviously, reading is the best place to kind of get all your information, but also be varied in the artists and the people that you read. So Black women, Black men, Black gay people, Black trans people. There's so much, content that is out there that has been suppressed by this country that I would, obviously actively love everybody to go and read.
Can I just come to you, each of you now? We've got 2 more minutes left. Could I just ask you to each say, for 30 seconds, just give a final concluding thought that you'd like to leave our audience with tonight? Linda first.
Look, Black history is more than about Black people. It's actually about, more than anything, about white people, what Black people have done. And to not be swathed in guilt, but to recognise what this country has done and the impact it has had, and be responsible for your bit of changing it back to something that we can all be proud of.
Thanks very much, Linda.
Right.
Alex.
Right. Despite the fact that we have a Prime Minister who once said the problem is not that we were once in charge, he's talking about Africa here, but that we are not in charge anymore. So that is a language of a white supremacist, whether he denies it or not, and he actually said that. Despite that, I am really encouraged by the likes of Natasha and the young movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's essential, it's necessary, because somehow we have to convince the greater populace that our lives are important and therefore there's value to those lives. I mentioned those names of those women again, Nicole Solomon and Miriam Henry.
I'm going to have to.
Their lives matter.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Okay.
She's on the name, actually, say their name. Natasha, your final thoughts, please.
I think I would just say that don't close yourself off and don't think that your opinion is the right one. I think it's really, really easy to kind of get lost in the fact that if you don't understand something, it's automatically wrong. I think we all need to be more open with the discourse that we're having. People need to speak to their family members, not just, speaking to other Black people, but speak to white people. Make sure that they're understanding what is going on in this country, because nothing is going to change unless we as people are actively doing something every day to make sure that it changes.
Thank you very much, Natasha, Linda and Alex, and thanks very much to everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed, to everyone in the audience, we hope you enjoyed the discussion and that some of your questions were answered. My apologies for all the people whose questions I we never got a chance to answer. But you can keep up to date for more Guardian Live events on our website, theguardian.com/Guardian Live. We've got 2 upcoming events that may be of interest to you, especially. Tomorrow night, we've got the author Emma Dabiri, and she's got a book out called What White People Can Do Next. And she's doing the Guardian Live event tomorrow night. And Ibrahim X. Kendi and Keisha Blaine are doing, on April the 14th, a history of African America, which again sounds like a really fascinating discussion. I should also mention that a short survey will pop up at the end on your screen. Please do complete it if you can, because your feedback will help us develop the programme. And finally, just for everyone here who's logged on tonight, a video of this event will be sent to all of you within a week. Just so once again, just thanks very much. Thanks, Linda, Alex, Natasha. It's been a great discussion. Thanks all for attending tonight. And all the best for the future. And remember, Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Bye all.
Bye, everyone.